I so enjoyed our conversations together this season. And so many members of the crib community have reached out to me directly, commenting on how much they learned and wanted so much to continue the conversations. So I'd like to build upon the same momentum to advance our discussion on creating culturally responsive configurations of knowledge and action. Nice title. You like the title? Okay. Really starting off with, what does that title mean to you? Culturally responsive configurations of knowledge and action. What does that title mean to you? Anyway, Bueller?
How about I kick it off then?
Right.
And maybe because I thought about this question a fair bit, and I'm not sure if I have a strong answer for it, but I think about the type of research that we do, our research design, our processes, the types of stakeholders we engage with, and recognizing their cultural values, the needs they have for the research, working with the types of measurement strategies, whatever we want to call them, how we want to operationalize, how we go into the field, our methodologies that are reflective of the lived experiences of the people that we work with, amplifying the voices of people who have been historically marginalized by powerful institutional discourses. Mm-hmm. And I think that as we mobilize this knowledge, trying to focus on that, the goal of the work being to improve the life outcomes of the people that we work with, to advocate for racial justice and social justice in our work, and to engage in public conversations that are not siloed by academic discourses.
I mean, okay. Panelists, anybody else want to?
I can jump in there. I think, okay. I think just sort of picking up where Julius just left off, this kind of idea of around these silos that we build for ourselves, both methodologically and in terms of discipline, when we're really trying to tackle these same ideas. And I think that's really important. And as we kind of focused on last week, it's like the communities that we care about are not siloed in this way, right? They're not bits and pieces, right? Their experience is both reflected in their voices and their artwork and their expression of their experience, and their experience is also reflected in large scale data. And we don't, we get very locked into this idea, well, I only look at data this way, or I only understand experience, when I'm actually speaking to the people who experience it. And we don't do the work to make those methods and those approaches speak to each other, to sort of kind of break out of these methodological silos, and also break out of the limitations of each of those kinds of approaches, right? So we use those large scale data to understand systematically what's happening, but that's not enough to speak to the experience of the people that we care about, right? Or to what is it like to be locked in this nexus of interlocking oppressions. This is one of the things that one of my students loves to say, the nexus of interlocking oppressions. And what is that experience actually like? And both of those kinds of forms of knowledge need to be in interaction and in conversation and dialogue with each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when, and we also need to engage our stakeholders in being conversant with all of that kind of data.
So important. Other thoughts?
Yeah, Stephanie? I'd also like to add, just like when research teams start to reflect the diversity and lived experiences of the issues that their efforts themselves are tackling, that's a really good start. Expanding who's a part of the research, that research isn't just done by academic folks, it's done by communities and is led by those communities. So I think such configurations can not only make sure that they're approaching the root causes of the issues that they care about from a multitude of different perspectives and disciplines. But then when they come to some sort of conclusion, like, look what we found, then they can actually do something about it in a nimble way. We don't just let things, I kind of said this last week, we don't just let things die on the vine because, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to make an app. I don't know how to whatever. That there's some culturally responsive and methodologically responsive and community responsive network there that can figure out how to troubleshoot what needs to happen next.
Yeah, 100%.
I think when I hear culturally responsive knowledge, I first think about why there was a need, or there is a need for that type of knowledge and action. So I have to go back to the fact that we're living in colonized land, and we're living in places and spaces and doing research where genocide and intersectional violence still happens, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, and other intersectional places. So that's the context always comes for me as important, and how we define culturally responsive is really important. I've gone to places and spaces where it was said that this is a culturally responsive place and space, but it wasn't Indigenous knowledges globally that were being looked at or a part of the perspective, but it was something that was said, and actually a pretty dangerous space actually to do research. So I think for me, it's always about how do we define it, who is defining, who has the power to define it, and what do we actually mean by actions. So actions mean that we are changing systems through our research. Are we dismantling them, or are we keeping them at bay by having our research published and not challenging the actual violence that these systems actually cause, and that research can cause also. So for me, culturally responsive is a very big term that needs to be unpacked, depending on your location and your experience as oppressed or oppressed people, or people of power, or who holds the power, who doesn't hold the power in a white supremacist system. So that's just a little bit of my thoughts regarding that.
Just a little bit. Y'all ain't ready. Crib community, y'all ain't. This is like people here. This is question one. Are you feeling this? I have chills. This is question one, and people are here representing tonight. Okay. Woohoo! Fire. So what does to follow Dr. Timothy, what does being culturally responsive in our research require of us and of the institutions we work within? What does it require of us and the institutions we work within?
I mean, I can start.
Yes, please.
Sort of building on Roberta's point, as somebody who occupies, I'm a white woman doing research, often doing research, and right now doing a lot of research around the experience of Black youth during COVID. I also do a lot of work around the experience of racial disparities in the child welfare system. And so I think the first thing that, in terms of how do I position myself in doing that research, is being very clear about what that means for me as a white woman to do that work, to really practice humility, to not assume that I know what culturally responsive actually means, right? Or do I get to decide what culturally responsive means? And so what it actually means is that I'm actually responsive to what I'm hearing, to what I'm seeing, to what I'm observing. It also means, I think, and this relates to the institutional question and the spaces that we're in, is that we do more work to make more space and I do more work to make more space for the folks who represent the groups that we're studying to be in the research, to be participants in the research, to be scholars in the research, to value their experience and knowledge and make that central to the way that we conduct the research. So that I just don't get to decide what's culturally responsive. And I also don't get to decide when it's culturally responsive. I listen and I try to practice as much humility and take the cues from the communities that I'm working with, the scholars that I'm working with, and hopefully I've created enough of a space where I can be told when I'm actually not being culturally responsive. So those are some of my first thoughts.
Right. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
I can jump in a little to build a bit more on the institutional piece too, I think. institutions have to value things in different ways, with respect to quality being really maybe more important than quantity in a lot of the spaces that we're trying to build. That this work to develop meaningful relationships in community and to engage community in the long arc of really hard work and hard conversations and dismantling the lack of trust that inherently exists between community and university spaces is one example. That takes a lot of work and a lot of time. That doesn't happen overnight. So I understand how universities are funded, yet I do know that there should be more of a focus on sort of the social impact measure and the quality of relationships and relationships formed with community as part of the research, and an acknowledgement that to do that in a really authentic way, you can't just jam out grant after grant, paper after paper, and honor anyone's experiences in doing so. So just kind of reframing what our institutional norms and expectations are for doing the work.
100%. I mean, I think to truly do, or to truly be culturally responsive in our research, it takes a tremendous amount of time to create credible relationships with folks across disciplines as well as in community. And when you talk about the structures that we work within, do the structures allow for that time? I mean, of course, I know that the folks on the line, we take that time, we take that, we don't ask, we take it. But so many times I think that is an important part of helping us to center ourselves to be more culturally responsive. Julius, I feel you about to chime in.
No, I want to jump in on that point, I think, and it's important institutionally. We think about supporting scholars who want to do this work, scholars who want to spend the time to develop the types of relationships that are needed to do this work, recognizing that financially in work note policies, the resources, and then also recognizing the value of scholarship that produces valuable but maybe non-traditional outcomes, not prioritizing, rank of journals, impact factors when it comes to how scholarship is being assessed. This is not just a scholarship thing, this is in our teaching as well. This is the flip side of what we do as academics, and something that's, for me, I think particularly important working in a teaching focused position, that this has to be recognized in our teaching as well. And that, we've traditionally measured success in so many areas, in white dominated institutions, about awards from funding agencies that have historically not supported scholarship colors in the same way, journals or editorial boards that have historically not given equal weight to the work of scholars of color. Or scholars who don't work in elite institutions, or people who work outside of academic settings, for qualitative work that requires in-depth time in the field. And then seeing supports in place, hiring, retention, promotion, that acknowledge the complex pathways that underrepresented scholars take to get to where they are is just so essential.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Roberti, I recognize you already spoke on that a little bit more. I didn't know if you had more to add.
I think that it's also important, at least in terms of my research, that cultural responsive also means heterogeneous communities. So when I work with Black, Indigenous, and purposefully racial marginalized communities, I'm working with heterogeneous. So the notion of that there's one type of community and there's one type of person is really critical to look at. My research approach, which is resistance education, comes from my experiences working in frontline work, right? So it comes from an African Black feminist perspective, particularly actually doing frontline work in shelters and trying to do anti-oppression work in that area. And I say that because that particular even approach that I actually use in all of my community work and academic work, and for me, the community and academic is really similar. I don't have that dichotomy because I'm a community member first, but it's really important to know who you are when you're doing research and what type of work, what research you're doing. So my research is not Eurocentric. It's critiquing Eurocentric places and spaces, but more importantly, it's also supporting African Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing and practice. And I think in terms of the institution, you are punished when you do things that are challenging a system that is colonial. And I say punished because I can't tell you, I'm not tenure, and who knows if I will be, and I don't know if that's my goal right now. My goal is just to do what I'm doing. But I say that because I have been told so many times that if I continue in doing the work that I do in the way that I do, I will not be able to work in the institution, or I will not be able to work in certain organizations. And that, that for me is just giving me more fire of the need of a type of work. Because when you are doing work to dismantle systems, right, you're going to be called out in a particular way. But even in our own communities, and I'm talking about our own communities of folks who are oppressed, there's also a fear of doing cultural responsive work because you're not going to get funding, you're not going to get this and that for some folks, not for everybody, because we're obviously here. But I think that's a really important thing to debunk. Also, not only the impact of white supremacy, but internalized white supremacy in terms of preventing people from doing cultural responsive research because they think that they're not going to get money or get a job from it, which in some ways is very true if you look at my history and coming from a working class background, not having those pieces. But again, it's you have to hustle different sides. That's why I'm a psychotherapist. I might be selling mangoes at your door, and the next day I do different things based on of survival and thrival, but it's also based on a system that does not want you to do research that benefits particular communities who are oppressed.
That part, and that part. I mean, I was going to chime in, but I just feel like there's nothing to say after that. But one of the things as well, I think that there are assumptions that are made because, particularly for the very few researchers that look like me, that there's assumptions that I will automatically be culturally responsive in my work, or that I've got that on lock. If I'm actually talking about Black survivors of homicide victims, surely somehow this has made my pathway easier because I also identify as Black. And that's a falsehood. I still believe that I have to be, because Black people are not a monolith. So I have to walk and enter into spaces wherever I am with cultural humility and in order to forge credibility. And I think that also, that sometimes feeds into a false narrative that we automatically know how to be culturally responsive. And we see this play out in our institutions, why we are asked to do the EDI work, why we are asked to chair, the task force for this, the task force for that. We see it take place in different ways. So absolutely 100%. I could talk to y'all all night. I'm just sorry. Even me, I'm tired. We're all coming tired. I just love this. This is giving me, as Stephanie said, she's like this. She was looking forward to this because it's giving her life. In each of our conversations together, you all have stressed the importance and perhaps even necessity of seeing, being, and doing the work across disciplines. However, we also know that interdisciplinary approaches to research do not always happen or happen easily for that matter. What are some of the barriers to working across disciplines, and how do we overcome those barriers?
I can jump in. I think it's hard to even know everyone who's doing the work that overlaps, or it's just hard to even know people exist. We get into our silos because we're kind of put into them institutionally, I think. So just even finding spaces whereby we can make those connections and realizing that you don't have to overtly do the exact same kind of work to have possible synergies too. And that's just so hard to even know the landscape of who might be out there who could help you do that wild idea that you might have for a project. But I think also something that's just so troubling is how our tenure and promotion, at least from the academic side, academic institution side, we value people when they're PIs of projects. We don't really value them that much when they're like a co-I or a collaborator. It looks nice, that's great, glad to see people are inviting you to do stuff, but then there isn't really a lot accounted for the time that you're spending. And if you're a really good co-I and you're really doing the work and contributing to important interdisciplinary types of projects, you're actually probably spending a lot of time because you are bringing a very specific skill set and really key talent and perspective to that table. So it does take a lot of time and it should be valued. And even how certain funding structures are set up, there's only a space, for example, with Sharpe, there's a space for one PI. So it's well, that's the leader of the project. And what that says just visually about the power differentials, it's well, that's the person leading this, that person can't be from the community. community members can only be at the, sort of the lowest level of collaboration in order to be considered. It inherently just shows cosmetically like what our institutions value, how people will get paid, how they'll be promoted, what they value. And it's not just about that, but it reinforces itself, I think, and people inherently feel less important on projects, even if they're really pulling important weight and bringing such invaluable perspective to it. So it sort of disincentivizes people to do more of it.
100%. 100%.
If I could comment on that as well, I think that those, are very strong points in this area. And I think that, as scholars, the academy has become so hyper-disciplinary focused in terms of our training, our methodological training, how we're assessed for tenure, for promotion is weighted heavily towards publishing and leading disciplinary focused journals. We focus, I think, for a large part, working with our colleagues, which is wonderful in many cases. And, I'm fortunate to have amazing colleagues, and I know many of us do, but that does still keeps us within sort of in our disciplinary silos. And, the funding, as just mentioned here, the funding sources for interdisciplinary scholarship are few and far between. Sometimes they're hard to identify. We attend disciplinary focused conferences, we read each other's work. Maybe we don't read as broadly as we'd like to. I know I don't read as broadly as I like to, as much as I try to be connected. And then to find, these spaces to have collaboration is challenging. It takes time that's inherently, I think, going to be off the desk work that's not necessarily recognized towards, the goals that you're trying to achieve professionally. If your goal is to be promoted, to have tenure, to achieve X, Y, and Z, this is challenging work that forces you to go outside of your comfort zone. And it's not always recognized, or historically has not been rewarded, given the challenges that it entails.
Yeah, I often find definite challenges in getting all the readings in, but you've given me an idea that I'm going to circle back to a little bit later. Sorry, Roberta?
No, it was Brittany can go first if she's.
Oh no, she's good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For me, I kind of echo some of the other speakers. I'm actually an interdisciplinary scholar, so I have many different disciplines, and I do that because I think it's, for me, it was a more richer way to engage in work. And so in terms of some of the barriers, when I'm working across different disciplines, folks tend to say, well, we can't do this because we're political scientists. Public health don't think that way. And for me, it's about your praxis. What is your theoretical framework, and what is the action oriented that you're doing in your research, right? So that is the most critical piece. And I've always, so I'm a Black feminist, I do African Indigenous knowledges, I do anti-oppression, decolonizing work. That is in every discipline. It doesn't matter the discipline, and I'm involved in many. That's, to me, how you work across these barriers, is what are you actually focused on, and what can you work together, to create these changes, or this amazing research project, or this amazing work that you're going to do. But I don't see it as a barrier for my work, because I'm constantly working across that. And also my advisory committees are full of folks from, different disciplines, different community members, different walks of life, so to speak. And that gives the richness of the project, and trying to get really diverse voices into the mix. So for me, it hasn't been a barrier, but I know that folks are like, wow, you're which discipline are you in? And they're wanting to pin me. And it's like, no, what theoretical framework and what action am I actually doing when I do the research? That to me is more critical.
I see Akwatu, I think, has joined us. I can't see you on camera, Akwatu, but I see that your hand is raised. Akwatu was one of our guests from season 3. And so Akwatu, do you want to chime in here? It feels like it. You're muted if you're talking. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Now I can. Sorry about that. That was on my end.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I spent the last 15 minutes trying to get in.
Oh.
I apologize for my lateness. And I just wanted to say that just to make a contribution, that I strive to learn and understand the other disciplines, and to sort of assign tasks according to people's skill sets, expertise, and interests, but also the the perspective that's or the framework. But I think for me, one of the main problems has been pay. Trying to pay people equitably for discipline-defined work. And, you know, sometimes the physician expects more to get more money than the psychologist, who expects to get more than the sociologist or social worker. And that's been the major challenge for me in terms of the interdisciplinary work that I do. And, you know, building a sort of a transparent process where, you know, we can make, the team actually can make joint decisions about such matters. Because I've done a lot of global health research, has been, say, oh, no, I'm in. Oh, I'm telling you, technology.
Anyway. It's something, but it's also me, Akwatu. It's also me. But keep going.
Yeah, no. And, you know, just in terms of very quickly, to sort of ground what I do and sort of contribute to the discussion, you know, for me, being culturally responsive really falls within a Black intellectual tradition of work that is descriptive, that is to say, giving voice to voiceless, in terms of gun violence, people, I actually not just look at the victims, but the people who actually, the perpetrators, if I could use that term, corrective, challenging falsities and perspectives that sort of take away agency from people of African descent, and prescriptive, encouraging Black people or people of African descent to solve their own problems, to find solutions that are grounded in their own historical experiences and cultural resiliencies. Just to quickly throw in my 5 cents worth.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for your 5 cents. It's worth so much more. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bryn, did you have something to add?
And the only thing that I would add, because everybody's really responded so well to this question, the only thing that I would add is that just that we have to start earlier, right? And so Roberta's had this very purposely designed this unique experience of creating an interdisciplinary sort of framework, and but I think that we don't promote that in our disciplines, and we are like, you need to learn the public health way, the sociology way, well, social work is so diffuse anyway, but there's still like some, you know, sort of key ideas that we think about, like, what does it mean to be a social work researcher? And I see, you know, we have the opportunity to mentor our students to think interdisciplinarily, God, that's a mouthful, you know, to reach across disciplines, to access other folks, and to also mentor and support students in other disciplines. You know, lots of people like in my area of research, like, have lots to say about the child welfare system, and yet they don't actually ever study what's going on in the system. And like, you know, doing the service of saying, here, let me get you embedded in those readings so that you understand sort of how that system works and what's going on. We have a responsibility to start sooner so that like the next generation of scholars can be more like Roberta and more, and just, you know, forcing the conversation. Like, I'm not going to be locked into a particular way of thinking because that doesn't actually answer my question. It doesn't fit my theoretical framework. It doesn't actually work to just be locked into one discipline. And it doesn't answer, I mean, it doesn't get at solving the problems or dismantling the system or doing any of the work that we actually intended to do, or, you know, when we started this journey, at least for me.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting when everybody's going back to Roberta, but it was so on point. But as you were speaking, it just, a light bulb went off for me, particularly as somebody who teaches our foundations course in social work. And we constantly talk about this symmetry that you have to create between your core values and the values and principles of social work. And when you were speaking, it was so clear to me that the way that you work across disciplines is you center yourself around your core values. What do you value? You value other people's voices. You value their knowledge and expertise. And when your core values are in alignment and right and tight, everything else kind of flows. So I so appreciate how you laid that out for us this evening. Thank you so much, as always. And then that is a central, I think, to overcoming barriers to working across disciplines. They don't exist if you do it that way. So I think that was a beautiful approach. I want to focus a bit more on the idea of configurations of knowledge. As a community engaged researcher, I often feel as though I'm a liaison of sorts, someone who serves as an interpreter, translating the languages of communities to the world of academia and translating the world of academia to communities. What are your approaches to configuring knowledge and expertise of communities so that they are respected and responded to in a culturally appropriate manner? Just an easy question. Can't tell if you're feeling that, you're marinating, not sure what to say. Nothing. What are you thinking? I feel like I'm in class, y'all. I'm ready. I'm looking at the classes.
Okay, well, I go first.
Okay.
Oh, is Roberta gonna go first? Go, Roberta, go.
Go, Kwatu, please.
Yeah, so just three responses to that. One is to sort of I ground my work in critical race theory and in Black perspectives on a particular issue, whether it's depression, psychosis, mental health, or gun violence, or so taking a critical race perspective. But I also broaden the base of examples because I'm also a Pan-Africanist, so I like to situate the context globally, compare and contrast with other realities to sort of either make the point or open myself to criticism from abroad, and thirdly, to build agency through recommendations that empower and equip Black people to act on a problem such as gun violence or depression or whatever the problem is, substance abuse, what have you. Over to you, Roberta.
I like what you said. I'm good. I think, all of those pieces, to me, again, it's right. It's your theory and your methodology, where you're coming from. These conversations are going to always look differently depending on your location, depending on what's your point of research. I entered research because I actually did not, when I heard research all the time, I was like, oh, I don't want to do research because of the history and current day actually experiences of problematic research that harmed communities that I'm from or communities I'm connected with. I actually did not like research. So I came into research configuring it very differently, knowledge, what knowledge was, and didn't have the university define what that was for me. So this question for me is kind of like, my research is not supposed to be in the university. The university is not, it's not made for these types of places and spaces, but my research comes from the community because I am a community member. I'm a survivor of transatlantic slavery and all of the other intersectional violences that I've experienced and African peoples have experienced and Indigenous peoples have experienced. So that's what we do. The knowledge, and the knowledge comes from that. There's not I don't know how to answer this question because I know the whole method of how I do it and why I do it has nothing to do with the institution.
Correct. And I think what I mean by configurations.
Yeah.
Pushing the needle and saying, listen, configurations, knowledge comes in many forms.
Right.
And it all needs to be valued and respected. Is where I was going with the
and I think that it can't be in a white supremacist colonized society institution. It will not be respected in the same way. I've seen it, I've experienced it, and I don't expect it to be respected. It doesn't mean that I'm like, oh, my work doesn't need to be respected, because I know the value for my communities. And that to me is more important, because if I looked at trying to get CHR grants, I know some folks got some stuff and some big other grants, my work is not necessarily going to do that. I'm not saying that I will never get that, but I'm not going to sell out my work for any institution. So that's for me, it's more important that when I'm applying for grants, and I've gotten more grants lately, by the way, maybe, I don't know, maybe because of the, the climate, which is a whole nother story. But, I'm going to make sure that it is responsive to the communities that I serve. That's the most important, because of the harm that has been done historically and currently to my communities.
Yeah. My integrity is not for sale.
Not
what I constantly say. My integrity
not
is
on the block.
Not for sale.
I realize how much I use emojis when I'm on Zoom, and now I can't when we're in a webinar, but I was like ready to do explosion emojis and like, yeah, what Roberta said. So I feel like constrained. I don't get
coming through in the chat.
Little emojis and such. So I love what you said, Roberta, despite my lack of being able to put up hearts and explosion signs. Another part of the configuration that I think, just to jump off of that, is so important is just going back. If you are the person, say, collecting the data or leading that part of the process, going back to the community at all stages of the process. It's like, did I get it right? What do you make of this? What do you think is next? What would you do from here? And just like, I think about how many times I participated in research and I have no idea what they did with my participation. I have no idea what came of it. Did someone write about that? Did someone do something with that? And we all too often just leave the respondents or the participants in the dust. And like, really, that's who we should be going back to first. So leaving the time and the space and being intentional, knowing that it might be really hard to find those people back, but like figuring out a way to do it. Like, this is important for me to share with you. And not making assumptions about, there are groups that have been just so over studied or over surveilled. But I think if you set up a study and or a project or research in a way that invites their perspectives in a different way, a way that feels good, then they actually want to be possibly more a part of it than you expected. Like I hear a lot, especially in youth experiencing homelessness, like, oh, they're never going to want to do that. They're so overstudied. And it's like, if you set something up that is on a topic, if you approach it in a way that, they're driving the narratives, they're really in control of how they are going to be seen and heard through the project. I've had people ask me after the interview, it's like, can I help you analyze these data? Can I help you publish? And it's like, oh, well, I was worried that no one would participate. Like, that's not what I was thinking about. And it was just so heartwarming and so honoring to think about. I went from thinking like, I may not have any takers for this study. This is spicy. This is sensitive stuff that we're talking about. No one's going to like this, to being like, yeah, can we help you write about this? This is cool. And whoa, like, what a reframe for me. And it was just in how you talk to people and how you approach them and standing by your word in making it so.
Standing by your word, for sure. And I enter the space with basically front and center, acknowledging the atrocities that universities and other organizations have done and still do, but also describing, here's how I'm different, but also acknowledging that I'm going to actually make mistakes. Like, just saying that up front, that I'm going to make mistakes. There's some things that and also saying there's some things that I know and there's some things that I don't, but I know that I can't shepherd this work without you. And I find that just having that authentic, just honest, forthright conversation is essential. Bryn?
Yeah, I think just one other thing that I'm thinking about when you're sort of trying sort of to configure this knowledge, I think one of the ways that, well, there are a couple of things that I'm thinking they're sort of disconnected. And one is, as a former like community-based practitioner who was, in the work for many years, there was a part of me that sort of died in academia, right? I lost it. Like, I literally lost the part of me, the spirit of the work. And I got locked into the product of the work and what's the right kind of data and what are the right kind of questions and what's the right kind of knowledge. And I knew as I was doing it, I was like, you're losing something, and I'm watching it like fall away. And, I have been recovering it, right, over the last few years. So I think, it's also what we sort of reject about our own experience, our own knowledge, that then, sort of separates us from all of the possibilities of knowing what's possible. So that's one thing that I was thinking about. The other thing that I was thinking about is also, and I think we talked a little bit about this last week, is that we decide in academia what the questions are, what we think we need to research, what we think is important, right? And sometimes we just need to go to those agencies and say, how do I help? Like, what is it that I can do? Here's some things that I know how to do. I have some weird skills, right? Like I know how to do a thing. And can I help you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And tell me how like, how can I support the work that you're doing? You're saying that this is an issue. How can I help you document that? Here are some things that I might be able to do. Is that a thing that would work for you? And so really, like, I try to present myself in some of the community-based work that I'm doing as like, I'm your like contractor, and I'm okay with that, right? Like, hire me. You're not paying me, but I'm here to do work for you, because I want to respond to the needs that you've actually articulated, and then that knowledge is so much richer, and we're actually asking and answering questions that there's uptake around. It's not like, oh, I have this idea of what this research should look like, and oh, do you want to be a part of it? It's like, you have a need, I have some opportunities, and I have all of the resources of this white supremacist institution, and I can bring those to bear. So those are just some of the other things that I was thinking. My connection is a little weird. Are you having trouble hearing me?
No, I'm hearing you just fine.
Right. All right. Good.
Just fine. Thank you so much for that. I didn't know if there was another response, but I wanted to squeak in this last question, if I may. Julius, did you have a comment?
Everybody has said all the things I was thinking and more. It's just, being humble. I go in assuming that I don't know, even though I've spent so much time and been grateful to be welcomed into so many spaces across the GTA and different communities. Being grateful for the knowledge that I'm receiving, recognizing that I'm being entrusted with the experiences of people that I work with, that I have the opportunity to learn from. And, not assuming that I know what communities want to do with that knowledge and with that information, that, and the products of that work, how that work should be disseminated. And, what are the appropriate questions to ask? So just being reflexive about my own place in the research and trying to make sure that I'm not centering my own voice in that research as well.
That part, right. Remaining neutral and biased and non-biased if you can. There are lots of questions in the chat, so I want to ask this final question. This, I love a good crescendo question. What is your greatest hope for your impact of your work? What is your greatest hope?
Let me go first since I had so little to say. My greatest hope is that my work will have impact across the Pan-African world, across in Portuguese-speaking Brazil, Spanish-speaking Ecuador and Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Central Africa, Sudan, as well as the diaspora in the Caribbean from where I come. I'd like to see, real application of, my understanding of stigma and efforts to reduce stigma.
Mm-hmm.
If I could do anything in my work, it would be hopefully to challenge the power structures that have produced so much violence and harm for the young people I work with. Hopefully to do anything I can through my writing, my research, my teaching, speaking wherever I can to improve life outcomes for those young people. And if I could do even some small bit to raise awareness and to drive forward public conversations about the harms of the issues that we deal with, and what are the appropriate solutions based on what communities are identifying as the solutions to those problems. If I could push those forward in any small measure, I would be grateful for that.
I feel that.
For me, this question is an emotional question. I feel the emotions within it, and I think it's. I start with the, my hope for the impact of my work first is that the ancestors are proud of the walk that I'm taking it's really critical. My hope is that the elders who have gone and are living right now are able to be able to see that there's some change. The children and folks in all ages and spaces have to, like, they're not going to be dealing with systems of colonization. My hope is to dismantle the system, to have something different that can to be a part of continue to be a part of movements, and my work can be used for that. My work is not by itself. It walks with individual folks, collective folks, and even the ones that are not born yet. And it's just, to me, it's about life and death for our communities, as I always say. And so that question for me is such a big one, because I think about this on a daily basis, not necessarily the impact of my work, but that I'm doing the work in a way that really creates change for my communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. I felt that.
It's interesting because there's a piece of me that is about dismantling these systems, and it is what sustains me, right? Is that there will be a difference as a result of the work that is happening. But somehow, when you ask the question this time, what I thought of is all the people that I work with, the students that I work with, the young people in the lab, and what was like emotionally resonating with me in this moment was thinking about them leading this work moving forward. Sort of more of like a short-term thing, but like that they're creating those spaces, that we're starting something that they get to finish, and I get to watch it like happen. And that's like, that was the thing that I felt in that moment, was the first feeling I had. And I saw them, I saw their faces. I saw these like amazing people that we're working with, young scholars, young researchers, and they're like, I want them to take over the world. Like, yeah.
It's so similar to my answer. It's funny, I'm in part because it's the same space, but knowing that I contributed to helping to build something that if I ever went out the door, they wouldn't even miss me in a way, and that they knew, not that I want to leave because I selfishly want to be around for all of it, because I'm fueled by that work and by that group of amazing people. But just like knowing that I'm here to provide mentorship and support, and even again using the university privileges and resources for good. But then if we make any change, if anything good comes from it, if research helps people, that the people at the center of that, the young people with whom I work, know that they did it. They were the drivers of that, and I was just an actor. I was just part of the troupe, and that I wouldn't even be honestly needed if I were gone.
Wow. And I guess I'll follow suit and answer the question. I think for me, my greatest hope is that I leave a legacy of research, impactful policy, and practice where Black survivors of homicide victims feel seen, they feel heard, they feel supported, and perhaps even free. So that is my greatest hope. So I realize we are at that. That time went by fast. It went by fast, and there are questions in the chat, but some of them have been answered. And I just want to, what is the best way to engage with communities in research? You heard individuals talk about centering the needs of community first, that thinking across disciplines, but the way in which you do that is actually aligning that with your core values. So engaging with communities in research. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to that question? What is the best way to engage with communities in research? So that question. Okay, good, got it. What tools are used to encourage participation among community members? I heard Akwatu said, pay them, value. That's a good tool. Did you want to ask?
Yeah, don't exploit them. Like, yeah.
Be ready to pay them and to spend the time. Don't just expect to parachute in, show up one day, hey, I'm here, tell me your stories, talk to me. Don't expect that, and to get the kind of, real knowledge that you need.
Right.
You know, be expected to spend time in community, just being there, listening to people, talking to people, being helpful, and don't just show up one day and leave the next day and expect that you're going to get what you want, because it's not going down like that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell it. Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, Rhoda.
I think there's many ways to engage community. First of all, like locate yourself in community. Number one, come off of the quote unquote ivory tower that some folks are on, and like look around. When I get followed at, you know, I won't say the stores, all the stores I get followed at, trust me, I know who I am in terms of my impact, the experiences of anti-Black racism. So come down from the ivory tower and be real and connected to your peoples that you are around on a daily basis. Number one. Number two, for me, I use art-based tools also, depending on the research that I'm doing, because I use the language of not only of the oppressed, but of resistance. And for African Black folks and Indigenous folks, we have used oral traditions and creative tools for many, many, centuries and et cetera. So use the tools of the people. But I really think that I just really want to make that point, and I might have said it 100 times in different ways. Distinguishing yourself as an academic is you really need to come down back to earth, because we are community members. I don't know how much, because it does something to the type of research when you come into that space like that, and it's not actually real for everybody. So I think you really need to challenge that whole thing of coming into the community. Like, what do? You put on a suit and come? Like, what goes on? Just open your door, look out your window. You're in the community. What are you doing, and how are you going to be? How do you have bathtubs, as we say in the Caribbean, when you're doing this research? You know, yeah. I'm going to be done because I can go on.
Listen. I think the other thing, I lost my train of thought. The other thing I want to add is to piggyback on what Julia said is be clear about reciprocity. This is what I'm asking, and this is what I'm able to give back. Is it what you want? I can do this and I can't do that. I know this because I've made mistakes where I wasn't clear. I thought that there was clarity about reciprocity, and that is a pathway to destruction and miscommunication. So be very clear, and be very clear about the short term and long term. What are you willing to give, and what are the communities going to have access to in the short term? And being clear about the fact that the research is going to take long term. So where is that middle ground that you all come to some consensus with about engaging in the work together is a very, very important tool. I see, Bren, did you have one or no? Okay, I missed it. I think I realize we're at time, and I think we've answered most of the questions in our discussion.
Can I just say one thing that's not in answer to that question? I think Dr. Roach asked a question just recently, like, how do we dispel the myth that the university is trustworthy? I don't think we can. And so I think that in terms of engaging community, we have to be transparent about what are the limits of, like, all of the things that we've talked about. We just have to acknowledge that this is the reality, right? And that that the university isn't necessarily trustworthy, and we don't build trust. I mean, and this is, as a long-term clinician, right? Like, you don't walk in and say, you're going to trust me and you need to be able to trust me.
Right.
You should not trust me. You have no reason to trust me until I do things that are trustworthy. Yeah.
Right.
Like, I need to prove that I'm trustworthy. I need to do that in community spaces. I need to do that by the way that I talk, by the way that I do the work. And I need to be prepared to take the time, and especially as a white woman walking into spaces that have been harmed by people who look like me in institutions like mine, I have to be willing to have the long game around, I'm just going to sit, right? And I'm going to listen, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to be respectful. And I'm going to acknowledge that I come from this place of power, and that it's not trustworthy.
Okay. Yeah.
You shouldn't trust me. Like, you shouldn't trust me.
So in the chat, action plans, we'd love to see action plans. And that's what I mean. Those action plans in terms of reciprocity need to be drawn out at the onset. So there's no ambiguity, and they need to be revisited along the way because stuff happens. We're doing stuff in real time to communities that have experienced trauma after trauma after trauma. And so I do think those action plans need to be drawn out.
Yeah, you have to be accountable for your research. The university, I do decolonizing work. The university is a colonized space. So I am straightforward. I actually don't believe in neutrality. I don't believe in that. I think it's a very problematic word, and it doesn't actually work, or it doesn't exist, particularly with the impact of scientific racism. I am very clear about my biases and where I stand and my framework, and I come from an African Black feminist, anti-colonial, intersectional lens, which means that we're interrupting this, and that, and we're actually fighting against this, and that. So in my research, it's really important to do that. So when I talk about the ivory tower, I know that there's, a big, maybe even 90%, I'm giving out numbers without stats, of folks who would love to sit there and be in the ivory tower and be the power academic. But I'm saying for folks who want to do social justice change, who want to actually dismantle systems, we also have to challenge each other and stop getting those same ideas and practicing it by dividing the community in academia. We have to stop that and be within the community. Accountability, be accountable for your work, which means you need to be real. I don't know how, from a working class background, we just say, be real, be straightforward. You're going to make mistakes, things are going to happen, but just, don't play up what you're not.
Keep it 100, keep it 100.
Exactly, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's all good.
Listen, I think the take-home message is when you're engaging in this work, tell the truth, speak the truth, even when your voice shakes, tell the truth. Because folks can see someone who is not authentic a mile away. And you do a disservice to them and to yourself. Oh, my colleagues. I was tired, now I'm energized. Now it's gonna take me forever to go to sleep because you all just bring so much passion. And I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to have individual candid conversations, but then we were able to come together as a collective and share our insight with each other, with everyone here tonight, as well as with each other. And I hope that this will continue. I'd like to continue this. So thank you so much. Crib community, as always, from our crib to yours, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, keep well. Good night.